Sometimes the truth arrives without a doorbell. It leans against the frame of your life and watches you fumble for language, patient as weather. It speaks through the way a room hushes when he walks in, through the pause that lingers an inch too long over your name, through the warmth that floods your chest when you are not being convinced of anything, only recognized. Before the mind can draft its contracts, something older lights a lantern, and you understand without ceremony that you have been seen, not by the eyes, not only by the field between you, by the quiet that begins to breathe. I did not know to call it resonance at first. I only knew that sitting across from him changed the acoustics of my thoughts. The same questions that looped all month softened into solvable puzzles. The same weary cares fell back to a human size, as if some inner lens had been polished. He never said the right thing on cue. He never performed the script. But when he spoke to me, his voice bent toward a register he didn't use with anyone else, and the space around us seemed to lean in, eavesdropping. Later, alone in the kitchen, I would realize my breathing had matched his without trying, and I'd feel a blush of embarrassment, as if my body had confessed a secret the rest of me hadn't approved. That is the scandal of the soul. It tells the truth early. In that season, I stopped hunting for certainty in the bright, noisy places. I stopped treating love like a courtroom where evidence must be presented and stamped. I began to listen at the seam between things, between daylight and dusk, between word and silence, between what we declare and what we can no longer hide. I thought of all the times I misread quiet as indifference, not understanding that some silences are the richest rooms we ever enter. They do not deprive us, they deepen us. They teach the nervous parts of us to unclench and look again. He would notice details. He had no reason to notice the way I shifted my hair behind my ear when the conversation touched a tender place, the way my laugh tightened when I was trying to be brave, the slight tilt in my handwriting on days I felt unmoored. He did not make a show of caring. It revealed itself in the small custodial gestures, the text sent and unsent, the detour taken, the half-step closer when a hallway felt too wide. Each act was a bead on a string he didn't know he was holding, and yet the pattern formed in his hands. Tenderness is often clumsy at first. Its grammar evolves in the body before the mouth can pronounce it. Dreams changed. I began to wake with symbols in my throat, a bridge lit by riverlight, a key warm from someone else's palm, a house with a room I'd never seen suddenly opening its door. All day they followed me like soft-footed animals, asking nothing, illuminating everything. If the daylight mind is the carpenter of our stories, the dreaming mind is the forest they're built from, older than our designs and uninterested in our bravado. In those dreams, I was not chasing or being chased. I was arriving. A threshold appeared, and I recognized the frame as if I had carved it before I was born. Perhaps we do. Perhaps the soul whittles a shape and waits for the body to grow into it. There are ways the world tests what you know. In groups, when someone spoke my name, his eyes changed, not the casual spark of gossip or the polite flicker of attention, but a reorientation, as if a compass needle corrected itself, confidentially. I used to resent the romance of such talk. The rationalist in me preferred arguments I could diagram, proofs I could replicate. Yet proof is not the same as truth, and what is replicable is not always what is real. Real often appears once and refuses to be staged again. Real is the throb in your wrist when the person you tried not to think about laughs in the next room. Real is the invisible music arranging your steps. I started to understand that love, the kind that doesn't audition, reorganizes a life without fanfare. It makes room. He would ask my opinion on plans I wasn't part of, as if testing whether the future could hold both of us without tearing. He would apologize for small things no one else would notice, not to impress, but because something inside him wanted to be clean where I might walk. He grew more himself around me, not less. The mask that made him efficient in the world turned faint at the edges, and the unscripted person unguarded, sometimes inarticulate, sometimes hilariously clumsy, stepped forward. I preferred that person. He did too, though he couldn't yet say why. Meanwhile, I shed some obsolete armor of my own. In the long hallway of growing up, I had learned to make myself the reliable one, the one who understood before being asked, who tidied the mess others left behind. It is a flattering costume until it turns into a prison. The first time he met my silence with presence instead of demands for an answer, for a smile, for the performance of okay, I felt a hinge loosen. He didn't rush in to fix the feeling. He stood beside it with me, and we watched the weather pass. If safety has a sound, that was it. I won't pretend I didn't doubt. Doubt is part of the liturgy. It keeps our awe honest. Some days I feared I was reading meaning into everyday fog. Some days the distance between us felt like a skeptic's victory. But even then, the subtle continuity remained, like a low tide that exposes a path between islands if you know when to look. I kept noticing how easily my day folded around the thought of him, not as an intrusion, but as a quiet alignment. The way your shoulders drop when you set down a weight you didn't know you were carrying. This was not a conquest. It was a homecoming. There are moments when life doesn't speak in words, but in arrangements. How time rearranges itself around a person. How coincidence starts behaving like choreography. I remember mornings when I would wake with no reason to think of him, yet his name drifted through my thoughts like a feather that had slipped in through an open window. I would brush it away, tell myself it was nothing. But by afternoon, some small event would place him there again, a phrase I overheard that echoed something he once said, a song in a cafe playing at the exact tempo of his laughter. Jung would have called it synchronicity, that strange dialogue between the inner and outer worlds. I called it presence, the kind that exists even when the person doesn't. The rational mind resists such things. It wants straight lines and solid explanations. Yet the heart, that wild interpreter of symbols, sees differently. It understands that attention is not accidental, that when two souls begin to recognize each other, the fabric between them thins. What was separate begins to vibrate at a shared frequency. And so, while my mind analyzed, his silence kept speaking. He would look away at moments when the air turned too honest, his jaw tightening as if containing a truth still forming its own vocabulary. I learned to read that silence not as withdrawal, but as reverence. Some truths are so large that the first instinct is to protect them, even from speech. When we were together, time behaved strangely. Conversations that should have ended hours before lingered, as if unwilling to let go. There were pauses that felt like entire pages of a book, unwritten but understood. He would speak about work, about plans, about nothing in particular. But underneath, there was a rhythm, a pulse that said, I'm here, and I don't know why I can't stop being. That's the paradox of connection. It doesn't always come with comprehension. It arrives like weather, undeniable, alive, indifferent to your preparedness. I began to notice how his presence softened me. Not because I felt seen in the flattering way, not because of compliments or assurances, but because I felt safe to be unpolished, imperfect, real. That kind of safety is a sacred space. It's the permission to exhale the version of yourself that's been holding its breath for years. Around him, I didn't feel the need to edit my thoughts into coherence. I could simply exist. And somehow that was enough. Jung once said that the soul needs a mirror to know itself. And in him, I found such a mirror not polished to perfection, but clear enough to reflect back the parts of me I had hidden even from myself. He would ask questions that reached past the surface, questions that left silence in their wake, not because he expected answers, but because he wanted to hear where my truths lived. Do you ever feel like you've been here before? He once asked, not referring to the place we sat, but to the feeling itself, that sense of ancient recognition that makes no logical sense. I nodded before I could think. Yes, I did. Sometimes it felt like remembering rather than meeting, as if the first hello had already been spoken in some other form, some other life. Maybe love isn't something we learn, but something we recall. There were days he would drift away, lost in his own introspection, and my old fears would return, the ache of uncertainty, the anxious whisper of, maybe it's fading. But then he'd reappear, sometimes without a word, sometimes with a small gesture that dismantled every doubt, a quiet check-in, a question about my day, a subtle glance that said, I missed you. Without needing to admit it, that's the strange language of souls. It doesn't negotiate. It simply moves closer when it must. And even when he withdrew, something in me trusted the rhythm, the coming and going, the contraction before the next breath. I began to see how his world was shifting, too. He wasn't the type to announce transformations, but they showed in the margins in how he spoke about the future, less as a solitary horizon and more as a landscape with room for two. He mentioned plans, small and large, with my presence woven through them as naturally as if I'd always been there. Someday I'd like to go back to the coast, he said once, and then, almost shyly, you'd like it there. No declaration, no confession, just a seed planted in the soil of possibility. It was enough. Sometimes love doesn't burst into existence. It unfolds quietly, stubbornly, like dawn pushing through a reluctant fog. It changes you in increments. He had once been composed, measured, predictable, but now there was restlessness in him, the kind that comes when the heart is learning a new language. He laughed more easily, spoke with more honesty, even stumbled over his words sometimes. It was endearing, watching someone accustomed to control lose his footing in wonder. Love disarms not to weaken, but to awaken. It teaches even the most guarded souls how to tremble again, how to be moved. One evening, we sat watching the rain trace its long, silver fingers down the window. Neither of us spoke for a long time. The world outside blurred into a watercolor, and for the first time in what felt like years, I didn't want to name anything. The silence between us wasn't empty, it was full, like the pause between notes in a song that knows how to hold its breath. In that quiet, I realized something profound. Love isn't about being understood perfectly. It's about being witnessed truthfully. And in that moment, in the days that followed, something began to stir beneath the surface of everything ordinary. Even my routines, the grocery lines, the morning walks, the dull hum of errands carried an undertone, as if the world had been retuned a half-step lower, richer, slower. I noticed I was paying attention again, not out of vigilance but wonder. His presence had reawakened that ancient instinct to see, not just to look, but to see. It's strange how love doesn't always add something new. Sometimes it restores what life had worn thin. There were afternoons when I'd catch myself rereading old journal pages, watching the handwriting evolve, how it once pressed hard into the paper, all certainty and ambition, and how now it curved softly, as though learning to breathe between the lines. Maybe that's what happens when someone enters your life, not as disruption, but as invitation. You begin to meet yourself again. You begin to write differently, walk differently, inhabit time differently. He never promised forever. He never used the grand words people use when they want to be believed. But the smallness of his gestures made them enormous, the way he lingered in a doorway before leaving, as though some invisible thread tugged at him, the way his voice softened when asking the simplest questions, the way he listened, truly listened, when I spoke about things that didn't matter to anyone else. You can't fake that kind of listening. It has weight, gravity. It pulls confessions out of silence. One evening, we talked about fear. Not the kind that startles, but the quieter kind, the kind that grows roots in your chest. He said he was afraid of needing anyone too much, of losing himself in something he couldn't control. I understood. That was my language too. We both had spent years mastering self-sufficiency, decorating it with success, convincing ourselves it was freedom, but beneath it was loneliness disguised as pride. Love exposes that disguise with gentle cruelty, not by tearing it off, but by making you forget to wear it. I told him that real love doesn't erase solitude, it dignifies it. It lets two solitudes stand side by side, breathing in rhythm. He smiled faintly, not quite believing, but wanting to. I could see it, the quiet battle inside him between the part that longed to stay and the part that feared surrender. But love, as Jung said, doesn't negotiate with the conscious mind. It moves underground, through dreams, gestures, timing. And I saw it in him, that subtle erosion of his walls, the way his eyes no longer scanned for exits when emotions grew thick. He was learning presence, and presence is the most radical form of trust. There were moments he'd forget himself completely when laughter escaped from a place older than caution, or when his hand brushed mine by accident and neither of us pulled away. Those seconds lived longer than hours, because in them, truth was effortless. The mind hadn't yet arrived to dissect what the soul already knew. I remember the night he called after midnight, his voice rough with half sleep. He said he'd been dreaming nothing coherent, just flashes of color, waves, a feeling he couldn't name. But you were there, he said quietly, not doing anything, just there. I told him that sometimes the soul rehearses what the mind hasn't caught up to. He laughed softly, that embarrassed kind of laugh that hides vulnerability, and said, maybe. But I heard something else in his tone, a surrender, a recognition that logic had finally stopped fighting. After that night, something shifted. He began to share pieces of himself he'd long hidden, the weight of his father's expectations, the mistakes he'd buried, the guilt he'd mistaken for strength. He didn't seek pity. He simply wanted to be known, and that desire, pure and trembling, was the closest thing to love's confession. There is a sacredness in being trusted with someone's unpolished truth. You realize that love isn't about filling someone's empty spaces. It's about honoring what already lives there, even the darkness, especially the darkness. We became quiet together, not out of boredom, but intimacy. The kind of silence that allows two people to exist side by side without needing to perform reassurance. He could read my mood from a single glance. I could sense his restlessness before he spoke. Words became almost redundant. When he reached for my hand, he wasn't asking for comfort, he was anchoring himself to something real. And I felt it too. That tether of belonging that doesn't confine but steadies. One morning, as the city stirred outside, I watched him tie his shoes by the door, an ordinary act, almost laughably mundane. But there was tenderness in that simplicity, the kind that only exists when every small thing carries the weight of presence. I realized then that love doesn't announce itself in extraordinary moments. It hides in the domestic, in the barely noticed gestures that hold the entire architecture of care. When he looked up and smiled, I knew without words something in both of us had already said yes. There comes a point when you stop asking what it means and simply start living it. That's where I found myself suspended between the need to define and the quiet acceptance of what already was. I used to think love needed an origin story, a timeline, a label that could survive scrutiny. But this didn't behave like anything I'd known. It wasn't loud or predictable. It didn't demand clarity. It just existed steady as breath, subtle as gravity, shaping everything without insisting on attention. The more I tried to categorize it, the more it resisted me. He wasn't a savior or a fantasy. He was just human, beautifully, painfully human. And maybe that's why it mattered. Real love doesn't arrive wearing perfection. It walks in with trembling hands and an honest heart. It's messy and reverent all at once, like rain hitting stained glass, flawed but luminous. With him, I felt both small and infinite, grounded in something I couldn't name but trusted more than anything I could explain. He began to change in ways neither of us could fully articulate. The edges of his old solitude softened. He laughed more often, sometimes mid-sentence, as if rediscovering joy in its raw, unmeasured form. I saw how his defenses, those careful pauses, those calculated silences began to fracture, letting light seep through. It wasn't dramatic, it was gradual, like the thaw of early spring. The man who once planned every step was learning to live inside the unfolding, and I, who once needed to be sure of everything, learned to listen instead. There's a sacred humility in realizing you don't control the rhythm. Some days we'd drift close, effortless and open, words spilling with the ease of tide returning to shore. Other days, we'd retreat into our own private corners, uncertain, protective, quiet. I used to fear those silences, thought they meant loss or disinterest, but they became something else, the spaces where love learned to breathe on its own. Jung once wrote that the unconscious doesn't lie. It speaks in symbols, in instinct, in what we can't quite rationalize. And in those pauses, I felt the honesty of what we were, two souls learning the dialect of something older than language. He started bringing me small things, not gifts exactly, but offerings. A stone from a beach he'd walked alone, a line from a book that sounded like me, a photograph of a sky that reminded him of a conversation we once had. They were fragments, quiet tokens, but they felt like the soul's handwriting, proof of presence in disguise. I kept them in a box, though I didn't know why. Perhaps because love, when it's true, makes you want to keep evidence of its quiet miracles. I think of the night he told me he couldn't imagine the world without me in it, not as confession, but as realization. It was late, the room dim except for the lamp's amber halo. He said it softly, as though speaking it too loudly might undo its truth. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at him, and in that gaze, I think we both understood love had already taken shape. It wasn't waiting for our permission. It was simply there, breathing between us. But love, being the paradox it is, also brought fear. There were moments when he'd withdraw again, haunted by some private shadow, questioning if he could hold something so real without breaking it. I didn't chase. I waited, not out of pride, right, but faith. Because real connection doesn't dissolve under distance, it ripens there. And sure enough, he'd return, always quieter, softer, more certain than before. That's when I learned one of love's oldest secrets. Absence isn't the opposite of love. Indifference is. Absence, when it's real, is just love changing its shape. I remember walking through the park one evening, alone. The sky was bruised with twilight, that hour when everything feels like memory, even as it happens. I thought about him not with longing, but with recognition. What we shared wasn't about ownership. It was about echoed two beings resonating in a way that made both of us more alive. For the first time, I didn't need to know where it was going. I only needed to be awake enough to receive it. That realization freed me. I stopped waiting for the story to declare itself and began to inhabit the moment. Every conversation, every silence, every fleeting glance became part of a language beyond reason. I saw that love's truest form isn't measured by its permanence, but by its depth. How deeply does it move you? How honestly does it strip away everything false? If the answer is completely, then the duration hardly matters. He once told me he dreamt of a house by the sea not as a plan, but as a symbol. There were windows everywhere, he said, and light coming in from all directions. I smiled because that was exactly what it felt like, this thing between us. A house full of windows, no secrets, no corners left unlit, not perfect, not permanent, but true. And truth, once recognized, doesn't vanish. It imprints. It becomes part of your inner landscape, the compass by which you measure everything that comes after. That's how I knew that even if life led us elsewhere, something essential would remain, that quiet knowing, that resonance the soul never forgets. Time, as it often does with things that matter, began to blur. Weeks folded into months, and I could no longer tell when one memory ended and another began. What I do remember are fragments, the hum of rain against the window while he read beside me, the sound of his laughter echoing off the kitchen walls, the stillness that would settle over us like dusk when words became unnecessary. Those moments had no urgency, no goal. They existed only to be lived, and in their simplicity, they became holy. The outside world continued. Of course, bills to pay, deadlines to meet, the ever-turning machinery of obligation. But inside that small orbit we created, time behaved differently. It slowed, softened. Every glance, every pause carried meaning. I think that's what love does when it's real. It suspends the world long enough for you to see what's always been hidden in plain sight. It takes what was ordinary and baptizes it in light. He began to change in quiet ways I never expected. The man who once kept his thoughts guarded started to speak more openly, not with eloquence, but with honesty. He shared the corners of his mind that he used to keep locked, the regrets that followed him like shadows, the dreams he had abandoned for practicality, the version of himself he feared might never be enough. And in those confessions, I saw beauty. Because love isn't about perfection, it's about the courage to be known anyway. When he spoke of his failures, I didn't see weakness. I saw a man brave enough to take off his armor. One night, while walking through the quiet streets after dinner, he told me that being with me made him feel both safe and challenged. "It's strange," he said, "how you can feel at home and still be pushed to grow." I smiled because I understood. That's what resonance does. It doesn't let you stay asleep. It calls you deeper, asking for your truth, not your performance. Love like that doesn't flatter the ego. It dismantles it. It's not a mirror that only shows what's pretty. It shows everything: the light, the wounds, the longing to become whole. There were still days when fear crept in. Love, this real, threatens the parts of us built on control. Sometimes he'd grow distant, lost in his own storms, and I'd feel that old ache rising, the urge to chase, to fix, to demand certainty. But I didn't. I remembered what Jung said: what you resist persists. So instead, I let the silence breathe, and always, without fail, he'd return, not because I called him, but because something deeper did. Connection, when it's true, doesn't need to be forced. It finds its way back like a tide to the shore. I began to notice something else, a stillness in myself that hadn't been there before. The old restlessness, that craving for answers, had softened into trust, not blind faith, but the quiet conviction that what was meant to unfold would do so in its own rhythm. I didn't need to measure his love against my fears anymore. I could feel it in how he existed near me, not trying to impress, not trying to prove, simply being, and in that being, choosing. Love, I realized, is not a performance of affection, but a reorganization of the soul. It rearranges your priorities, your habits, your inner architecture. I saw it in him, how he'd begun to think differently, how his language changed. He no longer spoke only in singular terms, but in plurals. We should go. We could try. We might like small phrases, yes, but they carried a quiet revelation. I was now a part of his imagining. The mind might take time to accept it, but the soul had already decided. There was a night, I think it was late autumn, when I saw the depth of it most clearly. We were sitting on the porch, wrapped in blankets, the sky a pale bruise of clouds. He said nothing for a long while, just stared into the dark, and then whispered, "I don't know how to explain it, but when you're here, everything feels aligned." I didn't reply. I didn't have to. That single word, aligned, carried the weight of everything left unsaid. It wasn't about romance anymore. It was about recognition, about the mysterious gravity that occurs when two lives quietly decide to orbit each other. In the following weeks, his care began to show in the gentlest ways: in the coffee waiting on the counter, in the way he'd rest his hand on my back when crossing the street, in the patience that replaced his usual rush. These were not gestures of obligation, but instinct, the unconscious. As Jung wrote, acting on behalf of the soul, and I found myself responding in kind, not out of duty, but resonance. When two people meet at that depth, they stop keeping score. Love becomes less about what you give and more about what you allow yourself to receive. Sometimes I think the truest proof of love is peace, not the peace of boredom or routine, but the peace that comes when every mask drops and you realize you are fully seen and still wanted. That was the gift he gave me without ever saying the words. He didn't promise the world. He gave me stillness, the kind that makes you feel that maybe the world is already here, already enough. I think about that stillness often, how it didn't arrive like a thunderclap or a revelation, but as something quieter, more ancient, as if it had been waiting in both of us all along. That calm wasn't the end of desire, it was its evolution. It wasn't the thrill of beginnings or the ache of uncertainty, it was the soft landing of recognition. When he looked at me now, it wasn't searching, it was seeing. And in that gaze, I understood something I'd never been taught. Real love isn't a conquest, it's a remembering. He didn't have to tell me he loved me. It was in the way he looked for me in a room without realizing it, and how his voice gentled when I was tired, and how he leaned closer when I spoke about the things that scared me most. Words would have been too small for what had already unfolded between us. The mind might crave declaration, but the soul listens to resonance. It knows when it's been found. I used to think the grandest kind of love was loud, passionate, cinematic, drenched in certainty. But what grew between us was quieter and infinitely more real. It didn't need to be declared because it was lived. It showed itself in the pauses, in the subtle reorienting of two lives learning to breathe in the same rhythm. Love like that doesn't demand transformation. It becomes it. And when you wake up one morning and realize that both of you have changed not by effort, but by presence, you understand that something holy has passed through your life. There were moments, of course, when doubt tried to return. Moments when I'd wonder if the quiet was distance or if his tenderness would fade under the weight of the ordinary. But then he'd do something small, something that reminded me that the extraordinary doesn't vanish. It simply hides in the everyday. He'd notice the way the light hit my shoulder at sunset and fall silent, not to flatter, but to honor. He'd pause mid-sentence just to listen to the rain. He'd reach for my hand in a crowd, not to claim, but to connect. It was all there, devotion disguised as familiarity. One evening, as we walked by the water, he stopped and said, "It's strange. Before you, I thought peace meant being alone. Now I think it just means being understood." I didn't answer. I only nodded, because there was nothing left to add. He had named what I'd been feeling all along. The greatest love doesn't complete you, it reveals you. It mirrors back the version of yourself that you thought you had lost to time. And suddenly you realize that love was never something to find. It was something to remember. Jung once wrote that what is not made conscious appears in life as fate. I used to think that meant destiny was something that happened to us, an external force we couldn't control. But now I see that it's something we call into being by the choices we make with our hearts. His soul had chosen long before his mind caught up. I could see it in how he stayed, even when it would have been easier to run. How he listened when words were difficult. How he protected what was fragile between us with a quiet devotion that asked for nothing in return. That's when I knew this wasn't chance. It was recognition, the slow unfolding of two paths that had always been meant to meet. There came a morning when we sat in silence, sunlight spilling through the window, coffee cooling between us. Nothing needed to be said. There was no grand declaration, no cinematic music rising in the background, just stillness and breath, and the knowledge that we had arrived not at an ending, but at a deeper beginning. I realized then that love isn't about where it leads. It's about how it teaches you to stay present as you walk it. And in that moment, the world felt whole. Because love, when it's true, doesn't ask for performance. It doesn't beg for attention. It simply remains steady as tide, gentle as dawn, vast enough to hold both your light and your shadow. It turns ordinary days into sacred ground and every silence into a kind of prayer. It doesn't promise that life will be easy, only that you won't have to walk through it alone. And maybe that's all the promise we ever really need. As I look back now, I see that every pause, every hesitation, every moment of confusion was necessary. The silences taught me patience, the distance taught me faith, and the return, always the return, taught me that love isn't measured by how loudly it declares itself, but by how quietly it endures. He once said that when two souls recognize each other, everything else is timing. I believe that now, because some connections are written so deeply into us that even time bends to make room for them. So if you've ever felt this kind of pull, the kind that doesn't make sense, that resists explanation, but feels undeniably true, trust it, not with your mind, but with your soul. The mind will ask for reasons. The soul already knows. And when you find someone whose energy steadies yours, whose silence speaks your language, don't question it too hard. You're not imagining it, you're remembering it. Because love like this doesn't begin. It reveals itself slowly, quietly, completely, until one day you realize it's been there all along, waiting for you to be ready. waiting for both of you to finally see what the unconscious had already decided, that some souls are meant to meet, to mirror, to transform. And when they do, the world shifts just a little, enough to remind you that what is real never shouts. It simply stays. If this story touched something inside you, take a moment to breathe with it. Let it linger. And if you felt seen in these words, let your heart respond. Like, share, and subscribe, not for me, but for every quiet soul who's still learning to trust what it already knows. And in the comments, write one word: resonance. Because when you name what vibrates within you, you give your soul permission to remember.